Hello, my name is Elliot. I am the University Thesis and Dissertation Reader at Cal State Fullerton. Welcome to this presentation. I'm going to walk you through some APA formatting specifically as it applies to our thesis. Now, before we get started, just as a quick overview, today we're going to look at a handful of things. We're going to look at headings, in-text citations, we're going to look at our reference list, and then we're going to talk a little bit specifically about our thesis and where you can get help on campus and off campus for that. Now, when you're writing a paper at Cal State Fullerton, you have a couple of different things to keep in mind. The first thing is going to be the thesis template and manual as available on our website. These will always take precedence over all other style guides. Now, there are a few times where it can be unclear exactly how to implement a style or formatting rule, especially when APA disagrees with our template. In that case, I would always encourage you to seek help either from me or from a graduate learning specialist. But we'll talk at the end of the presentation about how to access help. Headings can be a little bit tricky in dealing with APA or in dealing with our thesis template. Luckily, there are some pretty regular rules that we follow. Now, this presentation is geared towards thesis students. There is one notable difference in our heading styles between APA and the thesis template, and that is that in APA, our subheadings are always indicated by bolding the text. But in the thesis template, we actually underline the text rather than bolding in most instances. Okay, so if you're looking for general APA help here, just kind of swap out mentally underlined for the word bolded. Now, chapter headings are always going to be in all capital letters. They are always going to be centered. Now, this is the same whether it's chapter 1, chapter 2, or a section like Appendix A, table of contents, list of tables, list of figures, abstract, all of those things. Those rules are always the same. Underneath a chapter or section heading, we have a level 1 subheading. Level 1 subheadings are going to be centered. They are going to be in title case, meaning that all important words are capitalized. Usually we don't capitalize things like the negator, prepositions, articles, things like that, small unimportant words. Okay, the text is centered, like I said, and it will be underlined for our thesis. If you are using standard APA, again, you're going to bold it. Level 2 subheadings are actually exactly the same as level 1 subheadings, except that rather than being centered, they're going to be aligned left. They will not be indented. Okay, so they should be flush with your left-hand margin. Now, level 3 subheadings are a little bit more difficult, and you'll see an example of them on the next slide. But the idea is pretty similar to level 1 and 2. They're going to be underlined, but rather than being in title case, they're going to be in sentence case, meaning that only the first letter of the first word and any proper nouns are capitalized. Everything else is going to be in lowercase. The major difference here is that rather than being aligned left or centered, it's going to be indented from the left-hand side, and it's actually going to act as the first sentence or the first part of a new paragraph. Important to note for our thesis is that we can never have exactly one subsection. Okay, this means that if you have a chapter and you want to have one level 1 subheading, you need to have at least 2. So you could have 0, that would be fine, but if you want to have 1, you need to have 2 or more. The idea here is that we just want to avoid nesting one title within another, and making kind of this never-ending chain. Okay? Here are just some examples of what these headings are going to look like. So up top, again, this would be the title of a chapter or of a section. It's centered, it's in all capital letters, it is not bolded, it is not underlined. Below that, we're going to have a level 1 subsection where you see that it's underlined, but it's not in all caps, only important words are. One thing to note, the definition of an important word changes based on what manual you are looking at. So here you'll see the word is capitalized because it's the main verb of the sentence. The word the is not capitalized because it's an article. There aren't really hard and fast rules here. Just go with your gut or check with your committee or with me. Underneath that, we have the title of our level 2 subsection. It's underlined, it is left aligned, but other than the left align, it looks exactly like a level 1. Level 3, on the end you'll see down below, is a little bit different. It is written in sentence case, as I mentioned. It has a period at the end of it. It is still underlined, but it is indented. It looks as if it's just the first sentence in our text. Moving on from our heading section, we're going to take a look at in-text citations, starting with one author and working up. So here we'll see if we have one author or authoress, the rules are really simple. You'll see we have the author's name separated from the year by a comma. Note that when our citation comes at the end of the sentence, as in the first sentence, the period appears after the citation, not before it, not within the quotes, but after. Our second two examples are examples of voice citations, meaning that mentally we assume the author will read this person, right? So we have to say, according to Scully, we need to include that name. In this case, the name of the author or authors would come before the year, just like above, but it would come outside of the parentheses rather than inside. Notice that we're never going to use a comma in between the author's name and the year if it's a voice citation, only if it's an end of sentence citation. Okay? After that, we have commas as necessary by grammar, but they are not by definition necessary by APA style. The only difference you'll notice between the second and third examples is that the third example is an indirect citation. The rules about referencing your citation, however, are the same. Here, if we have two authors, you'll see a couple of differences from one author, but for the most part, they're relatively similar. We still, in example number 1, have a comma separating our authors from our year. And in example number 2 and 3, we do not use commas. We use the author's names followed by the year in parentheses. Remember, this is mostly related to if we want our audience to sort of mentally read those names, according to Scully and Mulder, right? Now, the other major difference here that's important to notice is that when we give our citation in parentheses, as in example 1, we're going to use that ampersand, Scully ampersand Mulder. In examples 2 and 3, because these are in text, they're voiced, they're read aloud, etc., we're going to use the word and. That's the major difference to watch out for two authors. From 2 authors, we move to 3 to 5 authors, so 3 or 4 or 5 authors. Up top, we're going to talk first about what happens when an article or any piece of material is referenced for the first time with 3 to 5 authors. So here we see Scully, Mulder, and Skinner. Again, the same rules about ampersands apply. If it's all together in parentheses, as in example 1, we're going to use an ampersand. If it's not, and the audience to read those names aloud, we're going to use the word and, as in examples 2 and 3 below. Okay? We still follow the same rules about commas, periods at the end, all of that. But one important thing to note is that when we're using 3 to 5 authors, we're going to put a comma after each author's name. So we put one after Scully but before Mulder, after Mulder but before the ampersand, and after Skinner but before the year. Okay, the one between Skinner and the year is to indicate that we're done listing authors and it's time to list the year. The ones in between Scully, Mulder, and Skinner have to do with APA's rules about the Oxford or serial comma. Anytime we list 3 or more things, we need a comma before the word and. Now, this applies in example 1 before our ampersand, but it also applies in examples 2 and 3 where we don't have an ampersand. We have the word and written out. Now, all of this only applies the first time an article is mentioned that has 3 to 5 authors. The second time an article is mentioned, and every time after that, we're going to be using et al., which is a Latin phrase that we can use to just lop off the rest of the authors, okay? So down in example 1, under second plus time an article is mentioned, here we have Scully et al., 2017. The formatting rules, the punctuation for et al. Can be a little bit finicky, so please pay special attention. We still have a comma before the year. We will always have a comma before the year to indicate which part is the author and which part is the year. The difference here is that we do not have a comma after the name Scully before et al. You can kind of mentally substitute and everybody or and all authors for et al. To help you out a little bit, but you'll see that we do not have a comma after Scully. We just move one to after et al. Additionally, et al. Is always written et space al period. There is no period after et. There is always a period after all. If we jump down to examples 2 and 3, you'll see that these follow the same basic rules as before, where we're using Scully et al. There's no comma after Scully before et al. And there's no comma before the year because here, again, as in all the other examples, the year is indicated by itself in parentheses. For 6+ authors, we actually have some good news in that we get to use et al. All the time. So here, even the first time an article is mentioned and every time after that, the rules for et al. Apply. If you look, you'll notice we still do not put a comma after Scully. We still just have one before the year for our first example. We have the same rules about the period. It does not go after et, it only goes after all. And when we're doing an in-text reference, we want voiced, we want students to read it out loud or readers to read it out loud, we still say, according to Scully et al., with no commas in the entire construction. Now, our reference list is different from our in-text citations. The reference list comes at the end of our piece, right? And we refer to it as a reference list for APA. There is a difference between a works cited, a reference list, and a bibliography, depending on what style you are using, so please pay special attention to that. For our theses in APA, it's always going to be our reference list, okay? Now, starting from our top example, this is a journal article with one author. So let's take a look at how it works. We have our author's last name, Scully, followed by a comma, followed by the author's initials, D and K. Please note we always put a space in between the authors with periods. This does differ from other styles, but you can kind of imagine if we had those authors' first names, for example, Dana Catherine, we would put a space in between their names. So we put a space between their initials. Now, also important to note in APA, in our reference list, generally, when we have a period, it demarcates that we're sort of talking about a different part of the reference. So here we have Scully, DK, and then the year in parentheses, 1993, followed by a period. The period indicates we're done talking about the author, done talking about the year. We're going to talk instead about the journal article title. And so that's what comes first. An investigation into paranormal sightings in Lake Okoboji, that would be the title of our journal article. Here you will see it is not italicized and it is written in sentence case, where the only things that receive capitalization are an, because it's the first word of the sentence, and Lake Okoboji, because it's a proper noun, right? After that, we have the title of the journal itself. So here the title would be Paranormal Sciences. This is indicated by italicizing the title and by doing it in title case, where both words in this case are capitalized. Immediately after that, we see sort of something that looks a little strange. We see 31. The 30 is the volume number, which for journals can vary between what year it was published in or sort of what cycle of publications it's coming with, followed by the specific issue number. Please note, Paranormal Sciences, 30, all of that is italicized. That's because we're referencing the specific volume. Now the 1 is offset in parentheses. It is correct, there's no space between the volume and the issue number, which can look a little strange, and that the volume number is italicized, but the issue number is never italicized, okay? Following that, we have a comma, and then we have the years, the page numbers for our article. Okay. Moving down to if we have two authors, you can see the second part of the citation, the title of the journal article, the title of the journal itself, volume, issue, all of that stuff is still the same. The only thing we change is the authors. Now, we're always going to list all authors in the order that they appear on the publication itself. So here we assume that the original publication first gave authorial credit to Scully and then to Mulder. You'll notice that the rules here are fairly similar to in-text citations for two authors. The major differences is, again, we always include those initials. And then here we have a comma after our first set of initials, Scully, DK, and before the ampersand. This is correct. In APA, in all references lists, regardless of if we only have 2 authors or 10 authors, we do put a comma before our ampersand, okay? Moving on to 3 to 5 authors, you'll see our example here is 3, but the rules are exactly the same as 2. So here's an area you get to save a little mental effort. Whether we have 2 authors, 3 authors, 4 authors, 5 authors, the basic rules are the same. We have the author's last name, a comma. We have their initials, separated by a space, another comma, and then the next author, and so on and so forth. We only include an ampersand before the final author, and we never use the word and, always just an ampersand. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated here. Moving on, if we had 8+ authors, for example, the rules change a little bit. We first list off the first 6 authors. So here we have Scully, Mulder, Skinner, Langley, Frohickey, and Byers. Those are our first 6 authors, again, as indicated on the original published piece. After that, we have our last set of initials for Byers, that's JF, and then our comma, followed by an ellipsis point. These are the 3 dots, right? The 3 dots indicate we have too many authors, and then we're omitting all of the authors from author 7 to the penultimate, to our ultimate author, right? So our last one, Spender, is the last author of the article. We don't know if he's the 7th author, the 8th author, or the 50th author, okay? We just include the last one. One last thing to note is that in terms of initials, always go with whatever is published on the actual piece. So for example, if you're reading an article by B.F. Skinner, but for whatever reason it was published under the name B. Skinner, use B. Skinner. Do not try and kind of mix and match and make everything the same. So here books are pretty similar in a lot of ways to journal articles. Again, we're always going to start with our authors' names, and all of the rules from before about authors' names regarding commas and periods, all of that still applies. After that, we have our year like usual, and then the period to indicate that we're done talking about author and year. Then we move on to the actual title of the book. Now, one thing to note is that the title of our book is going to be in sentence case. This can seem a little strange, a little counterintuitive, but it is correct. So paranormal sciences here, paranormal is capitalized, sciences is not capitalized. After that we have a period, and then we have the location of publication followed by the actual publisher themselves. Now, you'll see a lot of different standards for location of publication. Some places would say Oxford, United Kingdom or something like that. Kind of an easy rule of thumb is if it's a well-known city or a well-known location, something like Oxford, we don't need to include the state or the country or anything like that. But if you're talking about Fullerton, you might want to put Fullerton, California, something like that, just to give a little more information. Moving down to 2 authors, you'll notice the rules for 2 authors for books are exactly the same as they are for journal articles. We still have a comma before the ampersand, we still have all the names separated by commas and by periods in between their initials. Okay, all of these rules apply for 2 authors and 3 to 5 authors. And then, again, if we have a lot of authors, we're going to use those ellipses points to delete the 7th author up to the 2nd to last author. And then we're just going to list who, again, we don't know what number author that person might be, but we know that they're the last author of the piece. Here are a few more examples of some references you might want to use. Up top, we have a thesis or a dissertation from an online database. Online database meaning something like ProQuest or EBSCOhost, any of those big things that you go through. We have the same rules about our author's name and the year of publication. And then after that, our reference is pretty similar to a book, actually. We have the title, written in sentence case. Remember, we only capitalize important words, and italicized. So here, we're capitalizing the word Parkinson's because it's a proper noun, right? D3 because it's a proper initial. Dopamine because it's the first word of a sentence. But also note that we capitalize the word A immediately following the colon. We capitalize the first word following any piece of major punctuation, meaning a colon, a period, or an em dash, but usually not things for commas or semicolons, things like that. Below that, we have a newspaper or a periodic article. We follow the same rules again for authors' names. The difference here is that for the year, we're going to include the date of publication if we have it. If you don't have it, that's okay. You don't have to include it. You could still say Scully DK 1993. But if you do have it, it makes it easier for other researchers to find it. Okay. Now note, when we say a newspaper or a periodical article here, we're not talking about an academic journal. We're talking about something, for example, like the New York Times. Okay. After the date, we have the title of the article. It is not italicized. It is written in sentence case, where only important words are capitalized, followed in italics by the title of the publication. So here we actually have fairly similar rules to a journal publication. The difference is that we don't include the journal volume or issue number if it's unavailable. So the New York Times, for example, most daily periodicals do not have volume information. If your piece does have volume information, it is okay to include it in the same format as before. Now, the retrieved from, if you have this information, include it. It's always useful to include. Okay, if you do not have this information, it's okay. You do not have to include it. Most of the time, students are referencing online works, but if you have a physical thing, obviously you won't have a retrieved from. Note that when appropriate, we do want to include retrieved from, and then the URL, followed by a comma, and then on. On would tell us the date, so we would do retrieved from, and then that big long URL, a comma, and then on October 16th, 2017, something like that, so that if the content does change, we're aware of when it was originally referenced. Okay. Now below we have a website. Website is kind of a generic entry. If you have a piece that fits better in another reference format, for example, even though you're referencing the New York Times online, it makes more sense to use the newspaper periodical format. A website instead is something that doesn't cleanly fit into another category. Now you'll notice the names are of course always the same, but instead of a year we have N period D period. Please note these are lowercase, that is correct. This means no date. It just means that we can't find a concrete date of publication on the website. Always list no date, do not guess at the year of publication. Sometimes it can be counterintuitive because you see something like American energy usage in 2016, but who knows when that was actually published. Following the no date, we have the title of the web page. Now, please note that a web page and a website are different. A web page is the individual page. So you can imagine if you go to Facebook and you go onto your profile is a page versus Facebook is a website. Here we only have a page listed. Wanting to believe is the title of a web page, not of a website. After that, we have where it's retrieved from. So for example, here, retrieved from trustnoone.gov. Presumably, the title of this website is Trust No One versus the title of the web page, which is Wanting to Believe. A few final tips for our thesis students. On our website, which you'll find on the next page, you'll see a link to the thesis template. This is meant to be a file that you either write your paper in or you copy your paper into. It has a lot of sort of behind the scenes, baked in formatting that can help you get everything squared away and can make my review process easier, as well as your writing process a little easier, frankly. Besides that, if you ever have a question, I highly encourage you to consult the template or the manual or me or a graduate learning specialist the first time you have a question. Okay, it's always easier to fix things the first time. The hardest challenge I can give to a student is having to go back and insert a comma in every in-text citation before the year. It takes a long time and it's a pain, and if we can get it right the first time, we can give everybody a little heartache. Okay? Now, I am always available to read drafts up until the last few weeks of the semester when I'll be reading the actual submitted papers. For a draft, you are more than welcome to submit as much or as little as you would like. I see drafts that are a page long, I see them that are the full piece. Usually students go for about their first chapter, give or take, so I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Finally, the GLSs, our graduate learning specialists, are special one-on tutors for graduate students. They are highly skilled. They have a diverse area of interests and abilities, not just writing, so they can help you answer any questions. 99% of the time, they can get you the right answer faster than anyone else can. Finally, just a couple of resources. So the number one resource that I give everybody for APA and for Chicago is the OWL at Purdue. OWL stands for the Online Writing Lab at Purdue University. Just toss it into Google, you'll find it instantly. This is a great website that is very attentive to the APA details and requirements, but it's much easier to navigate than the actual APA website or manual. It also has a lot more examples. Okay. Further with that, the Office of Graduate Studies in McCarthy Hall 112. The front desk is manned by graduate students who are also suffering through some of the same things that you are a great resource to answer questions. Along with that, the Thesis Dis Help Desk at fullerton.edu. This is the email account of the graduate students that help us out as listed above. They are also a great way to get quick answers because there's a lot of them and they can answer your questions more quickly than I can. Finally, as I mentioned before, those graduate learning specialists are a great resource for any student. If you are enrolled in a 598 class, you are actually entitled to a second with them per week. I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Okay, and at the very end, you will see our website, fullerton.edu/graduate/current student/thesis.php. This is sort of your one-stop shop. This is where I direct all students to. It has the template, the manual, submission requirements, everything you could ever want, as well as links to other helpful services. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or any of these resources that you find here, and thank you very much for listening.